In this lecture, I want to show you a couple of different things involving modules. And I want to start by basically proving to you that Node does in fact wrap the code in our modules into a wrapper function like I showed you in the last lecture. So let's create a new file again, modules.js, and that's modules like this. Okay, and what I'm going to do here is to log to the console the arguments. Okay, so arguments is an array in JavaScript, and this array contains all the values that were passed into a function. So when I log this arguments array to the console, if we actually see some values there, well, then it means that we're really in a function. Okay, so let's run modules, and indeed, here we have the code in our arguments. And so let's remember the 5 arguments of the wrapper function. The first one is the export, so this one, which is currently empty because we're not exporting anything. The second one is the require function, so we can see that here, we have the require function indeed. Then the third one is called module. Okay, and in module, we have then module export, which again we talked about in the last lecture. And what we have here is not that important. Again, I just want to show you that we're actually in a function right now, so that all this code that we have in this module is indeed wrapped into this wrapper function. Okay, then number 3 and number 4 are the file name and the directory name. And indeed, this is the name of the module that we're currently in, so modules.js. And then here we have the directory name. So I'm on my desktop, and then in this How Node Works folder. So similar to this one here, but then this one has / the module name. Okay, so that proves us that indeed all the code inside a module is wrapped, and that we have access to all these variables, so these arguments. Okay, so I just find this an interesting experiment that we can do. And we can actually do another cool thing. So to actually show you the wrapper function, we can require the module, okay? So there's a module called module, which we actually never use, but internally Node uses it. And in there we have the wrapper. And so that is actually, this property is actually the wrapper function. So we can now take a look at that. And where is that? Yeah, so here it is actually. So this is the wrapper function. And so indeed you see export, require, module, file name, and directory name, and then the function body. And so this is what Node internally use. So basically this template here, it uses it and then fills up the body of this function with our code. Okay, so again, just an interesting experiment here. Now the most important thing that I want to show you here is how we can export and import data from one module into the other. And so let's start by creating a new module here in which I'm going to create a calculator, a bit like I mentioned in the last video. So let's just call this test module 1 because we're going to have a couple of them. And here I'm going to create a calculator class. So again, this is the ES6 syntax of writing classes in JavaScript. So let's add a couple of methods here. So add A and B. We'll of course return A plus B. So very simple stuff. Multiply AB will return A times B. And then let's just do divide as well, just for the sake of completeness here, by B, like this. Give it a save, it nicely formats it. And now we can do module.export, just like we learned in the last video. And we're exporting our calculator, okay? So again, we use module.export when we want to export one single value. And in this case, our single value here is the calculator class. So module.export is exactly what is returned from one module. So whatever we put there, well, then gets exported automatically, right? we can then save the exported value to a variable when importing it. So let's do that now. And now here, we can actually give it any name that we want. So the name that we are exporting on the other side, so in the other module, doesn't matter. We can call it anything we want here. So in that sense, it's just like a normal function return, right? So we can always return any variable, but then call it something else when we basically save the result of a function to a variable, right? So since it's our own module, we have to use the dot slash, so what I did just here, and then test module 1. And the JS, remember, we can just drop that. It's not necessary, okay? And so this C variable here, which is uppercase, because for a class, we usually always use uppercase names. And remember, we are actually exporting a class here, okay? So we can now use that class to do some calculations. So first of all, let's create a new calculator, calculator 1, because later on we're going to have another one, okay? And so now we create a new instance of our calculator like this, and this should be nothing new for you at this point. And then let's log to the console the result of actually using this. So calc1.add, and let's say 2 and 5. Give it a save, and actually that's comment out these two. Save it again, and then node modules, and here we have the result 7. So that's 2 plus 5. So it works, right? And here in our test module, we could actually do it in a more elegant way. So we could assign this class here directly to module.exports, right? So right now we have a class declaration. So that's a little bit like a function declaration where we say like function calculator and then this. And here we say class, okay? But we can do it with a class expression as well. And so like this, we simply don't use the calculator name anyway. Let's copy it, comment it out. Okay, so just like this. So we just say that this is a class and then assign it to a variable. And so that's now an expression. So let's run this again. And we see, of course, or 7 again. Okay, so again, this is just to actually immediately assign the value that we want to module.exports. And that's going to save us then some lines of code and I believe make our code look a bit better. Okay, so that's how we export stuff with module.exports. And now let's see how and when we can use the export shorthand that I also mentioned in the previous video. So let's just create a simple comment here, module.exports. And then here just exports. So a new module test, module, and again, module2.js. And so the alternative for doing module.exports is to add properties to the exports object itself. So we can do it like this. And using again the calculator example from before, we could do it like this. So we can simply add properties to the exports object. So A and B will return A plus B. Exports dot multiply AB will return A times B. And now let's just duplicate just for the sake of completeness again. And okay. So we created basically 3 anonymous functions here, D3, and assigned them to 3 properties of exports. And so now when we import this module on the other side, so in modules.js, we will get basically access to this exports object. So let me show that to you. So let's say const calc2 is require. Again, don't forget the dot and slash because it is our own module. Okay, and so now this calc2 here is the exports object. Okay, so let me show that to you. Console.log calc2 dot add 2 and 5. So that should give us the exact same result as before. And indeed, here is our 7 just like before. And if we add, and if we did multiply, well, then that should be, of course, 10. And so yeah, we have 7 from the addition here, and then this multiply gives us 10. So I hope that this really makes a difference between module.exports and export clear. So again, when we're using simply exports, we can add stuff to this object, so basically properties, and then when we import that, so when we require this module, the result that we're going to get is an object containing all these properties. And since we're getting an object, we can use the power of ES6 destructuring to do some cool magic here, basically. So let me get rid of this one, or actually duplicate it, comment out this one, and so we can use destructuring to destructure the object that we get. Okay? And it works like this. So we use the curly braces, and then we simply create variable names for the properties in that object. So again, let's use add, multiply, and divide. So that are the names that we actually have on this exports object. So add, multiply, and divide. And these actually have to be the exact same name as in the original object. Okay. Now the thing that this will do is that basically it will create a variable called simply multiply. And so indeed, here is our result. And we can actually only import the ones that we want. So just say we only want add and multiply. Okay, and so we will only get access to these two instead of importing everything from the module. And this is quite a common pattern that you will see used in Node, and we will do that throughout the project as well. Okay, so in this video we talked about the wrapper function here. Then we talked about exporting and importing using module.exports and the export shorthand. And now finally, just to finish, let's talk about caching very quickly. Okay, so let's create test module 3 here. And what I'm going to do here is to create a console.log. So basically some top level code inside this module. Hello from the module. Okay. And then I also want to export a function. Just one single function. And so I'm saying module.exports equals function without any arguments. One that will simply log to the console, log this beautiful text. Just some small emoji here to make it pop a little bit. Okay. So let's now require this test model. Test module 3. And I'm not saving it to any variable. Instead, I'm going to call the function right away without saving it to a variable. So we could, of course, do that. Then we would have the function in a variable, and we could then call it. But this is the exact same thing, because this will return this function that we defined. So this one here, right? It will return this because we're using module.exports. And then right away, we call this function here. Okay, and so actually, let's do that 3 times. And keeping in mind that we have caching in Node.js modules, what do you think will happen when we run this code? Okay, so let's run this and see what's going to happen. Here we have the result, hello from the module, and then 3 times log this beautiful text. So we have this logging here 3 times, well, because we called the same function 3 times. But we have hello from the module only once, okay? And that is because of caching. So technically, this module was only loaded once. And so the code inside of it was also executed once only. And so that's why this line of code here, this logging, was only run once, okay? And so these other 2 loggings here, well, they came from cache. So they were stored somewhere in the node's process's cache. And once we called the function here for the second time, it was simply retrieved from there instead of loading the module again. Okay, so I'm sure that makes a lot of sense to you. And so that was our lecture actually. If you have any questions, you can of course as always post them to the Q&A and you will get help there. So that finishes this entire section. I know it was quite of a ride until we finally got to this point, so a lot of stuff to take in. And if you did correct everything 100%, don't worry all too much about it, because throughout the course, most of the stuff will become clear eventually. Okay? So don't worry, just keep moving on in the course, and I'll see you in the next section.